So at this point, we're going to take 10 minutes to ask and answer any questions.
So I just want to make sure I understand this clearly. There's been a switch. Where is she? There's been a switch to the right in terms of politics, correct? So did President Josipović, did his message, did it have any lasting effects? Has it survived into the present?
If I understood well, you're asking me if his politics of reconciliation has actually affected his presidency. I think yes. But I don't think those messages were the main reason why he was not re-elected as a president, because everyone who was a president has a chance to be re-elected once. He actually tried to please too much all sides. He tried to please also those nationalists in the country, and he lost his traditional electorate for trying to be too reconciliatory with everyone. I believe that if he pursued, if I can say, the rigid human rights agenda, where he was trying to voice the democratic consolidation, let's say, vocabulary in the domestic politics, he would have not lost his traditional electorate, who sustained at the elections because they were disappointed by, in their interpretation, too weak president standing towards nationalists. But he was really severely attacked by nationalists. For example, in Croatia, there is a slander for those who are actually in favor of minority protection, that they are mental Yugoslavs. So that they long for former state union with Yugoslavia, and they dislike Croatia. I am one of mental Yugoslavs because my field of scientific interest is protection of national minorities. So if you are not very rigidly nationalist, then you are a threat to the nation state. And unfortunately, this is the legacy of the conflict that we are still bearing. Plus, there is another discourse of Second World War Nazi collaboration, part of Croatian history, where part of the population are actually celebrating Croatian participation in the Second World War and commitment of genocide against Jews, Roma, and Serbs, who were victims in this time. So I believe that the educational system is not doing enough, and it's not addressing those injustices properly. And unfortunately, the nationalist discourse is a predominant one, and this is something that is difficult to tackle and fight against in the society, particularly after this outside influence and the pressure from European Union has ceased to exist. Plus, we have to be aware that Croatia, as a part of European Union, is not the only country that is experiences this resurrection of fascism and sympathy for fascism and threat to exclusion of the others, particularly immigrants or some national minorities. This is the trend that is taking place across European Union countries, with the rise of rightist parties, anti-immigrants parties, and so on. So we have quite some problems to tackle in that part of the world.
Can I ask a really quick question? Do you think Milosevic was actually held accountable in the end?
Who?
Milosevic?
Milosevic? Well, Milosevic was the Serb leader of early 1990s and late 80s, and he was brought into prison in early 2000, yes, to be prosecuted before this international tribunal for former Yugoslavia, but he died while the prosecution was still in place. I'm sure he would be found guilty, and that could have served as a catharsis for part of the Serbian nation, because when there are some unanswered questions and things that were not brought to the end, there is always space for manipulation by some political leaders. And in the time of inequality and economic scarcity, people are easily manipulated on nationalistic stands. Something similar to what you were saying.
Okay, thank you so much. I will take a question from Professor Royster.
So question for Michael Royster. How do you see the role of both big and small screen media in the promotion of violence as well as aspiration among youth?
Can you repeat the first part of the question?
The role of big and small screen media, I mean the cinemas and the TVs and all this, yeah, in the promotion of violence as well as aspiration among youth.
Okay, it is safe to say that I don't have the data in front of me, but there is a significant amount of data that suggests that that the mass media is a child's #1 source for their influence. Which includes, not just everything from social media to large, small screen, and so forth. And then #2 behind them would be the peers. So that means parents today have a lot of competition before it even gets to the parents. And then we're talking about other institutions that were set up to have that kind of influence, like education or religion. They're way down there. And so it is safe to say that the purpose of at least the first industry is profit driven. And it is not so much concerned about transforming society or promoting peace or giving or expanding, at least for underrepresented groups, expanding their aspirational capital. And for the most part, by the time a child is an adolescent, they not only have learned their place in society, learned their place in the world, and the mass media and social media has to find the individual before they can define themselves.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all right, so, because this gentleman's question had something to do with what I wanted to say, what I heard of yours. And it does involve the media, but it also involves the humanism that was spoken about yesterday. I remember two very distinct incidences that happened in this country. One where a black man in Texas, this was about 6 or 7 years ago, was dragged behind a truck and for a long way. And one of the people that was in that truck was a friend of his. They were white. And his body parts, as he was, torn apart, his body parts, his head was over here, his arms and everything down there. The other one was when a person went into a church about 2 or 3 years ago and took a rifle and shot 9 people that were in the church who invited him in because they wanted to fellowship. It was a black church. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is the humanism again that comes in. I was pissed. I was hurt. Maybe even more than, when is this going to stop? And who's going to do anything about it? You mentioned the word apathy. Because I'm a fighter, but a struggler, but, an army of one in this society doesn't kind of work too much. But what happened was, I watched in each case a group of people say, I forgive them. This was like the next day. This was like, wow, I was still processing it. And because their family members were saying, I forgive them, I had to look at myself. Because I'm not ready to run out in the street and start a war. I'm not violent that way, but I do, I love justice, and the things that the larger screen always brought to me was getting back at your enemy in a certain kind of way, even though my personal history is, was nonviolence and civil rights and stuff like that. So my point is that even though it seems like there's nothing that you can do that can happen. Sometimes a Rosa Parks will sit on a bus at a time that was not orchestrated and say, no, I'm tired, I'm not getting up. You know, and it sparks, it doesn't start, it sparks a movement. And people who have these horrific things happen to them, and with tears in their eyes, their family members have come out and they say, I forgive him. I forgive him. I'm just saying, you know, sometimes it's a double-edged sword. It can be really a negative influence, but when that voice of truth steps up, that voice that's not yours, it shows you how far you have to grow, yeah, it can really, really, really work.
All right, any final comments? Just in a short minute from either of you on that note?
Well, I do appreciate your addressing how far and how deep and how profound forgiveness is. And that is not to underestimate how difficult. In other words, it's easy to say, I forgive you, just on the surface level, but that's putting it into action. That's a huge first step. Because I actually heard Sabrina Fulton speak a couple of years ago. Sabrina Fulton, just as a reminder, is Trayvon Martin's mom. And when the question and answer came, the question was, have you ever forgiven George Zimmerman? And her answer was absolutely not. That was her answer. And the correct answer is yes, I forgive him, but she gave, she's still a grieving mother, and that was her real answer. But she did acknowledge that she's working on it. It just didn't, we're talking about enough, in her case, she's acknowledging that it takes time, but that was quite amazing that, I think you're referring to Dylan Roof at St. Emmanuel AME Church in South Carolina. That was quite amazing for just the words I forgive to come out the next day.
Okay, we have one question from Basil.
Yeah, Michael, I have just one question for you. Now, you were talking about cultural deprivation. If the citizens who are deprived, highly deprived, they're making efforts, lots of efforts to dismantle the structure that in the first place deprived them to have access to any of those things you talked about, the economy and order, with little or minimal results. And you mentioned that one of the ways they can actually fight to get their results is by calling elected officials and order. Now, what happens if that does not work? That part you didn't address it, so I think it's just very important, because you said that could lead to terrorism and all the other stuff you mentioned. So what other efforts or other ways could they embark upon to achieve results?
Okay, I think I brought that up for the simple fact that many college-educated individuals do not know who their local representatives are in the first place. They might not be represented, I agree, but they're still public officials. Most local representatives are relatively close to their neighborhood. They have an office somewhere over there, and they are anonymous, and they can be, you see them at the grocery store, at the barber shop, everywhere. And many of them who are not representing enjoy the idea of being invisible and perhaps even voting for or setting an agenda that's contrary to the needs of people who are right there in their midst. They enjoy the fact that there are masses who are just completely unengaged. And then, of course, so my answer to that one is, not an easy answer, but typically individuals And public officials tend not to respond to too much until there are extreme circumstances. There has to be a significant amount of pressure. If the pressure is minimal, then they can easily dismiss it. So, yes, and the same thing with like school board. I mean, they set all kinds of agendas. School board meetings in many districts across the country make all kinds of major decisions beyond just simply the curriculum, although the curriculum is major as well. And the minutes are public. Everybody pays taxes, and if they're not a homeowner, they're paying it through the rent. It's already included. And many of those key makers enjoy the privilege of being anonymous. And, for example, governors and so forth. So now, the first thing, of course, is not to expect instant results in 24 to 48 hours, or usually it doesn't work that way. It took, for something as simple as the Brown versus Board of Education decision that was made in 1954. For the next 14, first of all, it took a lot just to make it to the Supreme Court, and then it took another 14 more years. For the next 14 years, many school districts in certain regions of the country said, so what, to the Supreme Court? And then by, let's say, roughly around 68 or so, through the early 70s, some of these districts began the first step of addressing that issue. I mean, there were some districts that were still said, so what, to the Supreme Court as late as the late 70s in the US. So my question is, so my answer to the question is, what if it doesn't work? That means the pressure has to escalate. No, not violence, pressure. And so the pressure has to escalate and it has to persist. And of course, one will get tired before the other. Of course, what happened by the 60s and early 70s was many of these school districts started losing money, or they needed federal funding, so therefore people responded. That was an example of an extreme desperate situation. So I'm not saying be patient either. Patience is great, but at the same time, persistence. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Royster and Dr. Antonija. We are going to take a 10-minute break now, everyone. Thank you.